Tonight on Reel to Reel, we'll see a housing ministry put faith into action.
Continue your spiritual journey with Father Tom Legere.
We'll travel to Montana to learn more about the Flatheads.
Father Daniel Murray echoes the words of Malachi.
And we'll see an unusual church with wheels and rails.
Hello, I'm Father Dave McGowan.
And I'm Jane Rudolph. Welcome to another edition of Reel to Reel.
Good evening. For our first story tonight, we'll travel to Montana to meet a group of Native American Indians. The Flathead Indians are predominantly Catholic, thanks to the effort of the Jesuit priests who did so much to spread the word of God in the then unexplored American Northwest.
Throughout history, missionaries such as the Jesuits have sought converts. The Flathead Indians are unique in that they sought out the missionaries. On 4 separate occasions, they sent delegations to St. Louis to speak with the bishop there about establishing their own mission.
These elders of Montana's Flathead Indian tribe are recording an oral account of the tribe's history and customs, its stories and traditions. The tapes, done in their native language of Salish, are a means of passing on the Flatheads' cultural identity and language, both of which are in danger of becoming lost. Clarence Woodcock is the director of the Tribal Cultural Center, an active Catholic and a spiritual leader of the tribe.
The young people, they wanted to do something. They wanted to be Indian, but they just didn't know how.
Most of the Flathead people are Catholic and have taken on much of the white church's culture. But the alliance between their native spirituality and Western values has often been uneasy.
They still believed in those kind of customs, that Catholic tradition, and so, but they want to be Indian too, and so they become totally confused, don't know where to go, and end up not having anything.
Cultural confusion is not the only problem the Flatheads endure. Unemployment, alcoholism, and diet-related disease plague the reservation. And though the Flatheads hold large tracts of land, much of it is leased to outside farmers and ranchers. Once, the Flathead Indians lived in peaceful coexistence with the land. They foraged for food or hunted the bison and antelope. How the Flatheads moved from a life of harmony to one of disruption is a story that has its beginning 80 miles to the south of the reservation. The Bitterroot Valley was once the homeland of the Flatheads. Now it's a place for ranching and farming, for retirement and recreation. The area is small in Catholic population, but rich in Catholic history. St. Mary's Church was started in 1841 as a mission to the Flathead Indians. It's the site of Montana's first permanent white settlement. The construction of a new church community center indicates how the parish is keeping an eye to the future, while the church's stained glass windows show the parish's strong ties to the past. The windows present a multi-hued history of St. Mary's mission, and in part, a history of the Flathead people. Lucille Evans is the author of several books about St. Mary's history.
In 1821, some Iroquois came here, brought by one of the fur companies. They were to teach these Western Indians to trap beaver, so the gentlemen of Europe could wear these tall fur hats. The Flatheads weren't the least bit interested in learning to trap beaver, but the Iroquois, who had been Catholic for 200 years, found that they had a great deal in common with these Western Indians. They had the same moral standards. These Iroquois talked about men who wore long black robes, a rosary in their belt, crucifix around their necks, and they had no wives. They had the big prayer, and they taught people how to live in this life so they could be reunited with their loved ones after death. So the Flatheads became very interested, and they wanted them black robes to come live with them.
The Indians sent 3 separate delegations to St. Louis to ask for the black robes. On the 3rd trip, the group was martyred by a band of Sioux Indians. Finally, a 4th delegation was met by Father Pierre de Smet, a Jesuit from Belgium.
It's the only time in recorded history that natives of their own accord have sought the services of a missionary. Usually the missionaries seek the natives.
In 1841, de Smet and his party arrived at the Flathead camp and planted a cross, thus founding the first of many Jesuit missions in the Northwest. For several years, the mission prospered, due in large part to Father Anthony Ravalli. One of de Smet's recruits, Ravalli was a physician, artist, sculptor, architect, and machinist. His skills aided both the Indians and the white settlers. The interior of St. Mary's Third Chapel, which dates from 1866, was designed by Ravalli, who also did much of the art and craft work. Ravalli's house and pharmacy still stand on the mission grounds, just a short distance from his gravesite. By the end of the 19th century, the rich valley had attracted so many white settlers that the government forced the Flatheads from their home. The Indians were allowed to keep only 2 acres near the mission for their tribal burial ground. The tribe was moved north to the Flathead Reservation in Mission Valley. Here, St. Ignatius Mission had already existed since 1854.
I came to St. Ignatius here the
Father
first time
Ignatius
before I was
Dumbeck is
priest
93 years old and has served at St. Ignatius since 1917. He remembers a Flathead woman who made the march from her home in the Bitterroot Valley.
And she told me that the Indians, it was a terrible thing for the Indians. Why couldn't they make that the reservation and let them stay in their homeland? But no, the government had set this Flathead Indian Reservation, so there's nothing else to do but to move. And the poor Indians, they were just heartbroken to leave. See, there, all of their families were buried there and everything. Their whole Indian life was centered around in the Bitterroot Valley.
The Flatheads arrived at a time when St. Ignatius was undergoing its golden age. The mission complex consisted of 2 schools, a hospital, residences, and the beginnings of a new church. Now all that remains are 2 of the original houses and the church. The Flathead Indians are a very devout and sincere people. Though most have remained Catholic, there has not always been religious accord.
And there were some people, though, that stuck real hard to their own Indian spiritual ways. And there was a misunderstanding by the people, the Jesuits, the missionaries, about the religious, Indian spiritual religious ceremonies and the dance and the songs, so they, kind of put those down. And it took a long time from both sides, both from the missionaries and from the Indian people, to finally realize and come to a conclusion, understanding that it was the same God that they were talking about, but just done in different ways.
Chief Charlo, the tribal leader who finally consented to move his people to the reservation, left his tribe an important legacy.
He came up here as a forgiven man, a man that forgave the settlers that came onto the reservation, forgave the government that pushed him out off of his own land. I think today there's a real major thrust by people our age and even the elders and the younger people to help heal themselves, I guess, from a lot of the past hurts, become more forgiving.
We can all learn a lesson from Chief Charlo, who spoke of forgiveness for the government and the settlers even after his tribe's land was taken away.
Please don't go away. We'll be right back.
Pope John Paul II has praised the Catholic press for its truth in witnessing to the faith. In Philadelphia, its suburbs, and the Allentown area, the Catholic Standard and Times serves the needs of the Catholic community by providing regular, accurate, and detailed information about your church. Keep up with the weekly news and features that shape your world. Subscribe to the Catholic Standard and Times. For more information, call 587-3666.
Jane, have you ever heard of baptism taking place in a railroad car?
Well, not until I saw this next story, Father, but this railroad car is pretty unusual. Have you ever heard of a church with wheels?
In the early days of this century, before commercial airliners and interstate highways, the vast open spaces of the American West still isolated thousands of small towns. For many Catholics, this isolation often meant no church, no priest, and no sacraments. But this was also the age of the railroad, and it was the railroad that brought the faith to remote communities. Father Clement Kelly had an idea for a chapel on wheels, a Pullman-style railroad car that would serve as an itinerant church. Father Kelly was the founder of the Catholic Church Extension Society, an organization that supports the church in rural areas. Through Extension's chapel car, Father Kelly saw a means to bring Catholicism to remote sections of the country. The car included a built-in altar, organ, and confessional. In the back were a study and living quarters for a chaplain and a caretaker cook. Originally, 3 chapel cars were built, the first in 1907. The St. Paul was the last car. Dedicated in 1915, it served home missions until the mid-1930s, and now belongs to a private railroad museum in Nevada City, Montana. The St. Paul was put back into use for the Extension Society's 80th anniversary celebration. The day's festivities began with a procession to the chapel car. The parade featured residents from nearby towns dressed in frontier garb.
Michelle Rose, the Christian community welcomes.
The day's service began as it often did 70 years ago with a baptism. Michelle Rose Serino was brought into the Catholic faith by Father John Kirsch from the nearby town of Ennis.
Michelle Rose, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
My brothers and sisters, before we celebrate, let us put ourselves in God's presence.
Later, a celebration of the Mass was led by Extension Society President, Father Edward Slattery. His homily emphasized the importance of the chapel car's mission.
One of the beautiful byproducts of all of this is that as the train went by and from one little village to another, little communities began to spring up. People were becoming baptized. People were becoming more aware of their Catholicity, that they were Catholics, but their faith had kind of dried up just because the church wasn't present to them.
Nowadays, Extension's chapel cars have been replaced by more modern ways of bringing the faith to remote communities. But the St. Paul still stands as a tribute to the home missionaries who traveled the rails to spread the Word of God.
Father Tom Legere is with us with some advice on how we can know God a little better by knowing ourselves.
Greetings in the Lord. Psychologists Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung agreed about a lot of things in their lives, but there was one major area of disagreement. Freud said that when we are born, our minds are like a blank slate. Jung, however, came to the conclusion that we are born with certain innate spiritual patterns that are already there deep within our minds when we are born. Now, how did they arrive at this difference of opinion? Well, Jung did a lot of studies of different cultures and religious traditions all around the globe, and he found out that there was an amazing similarity between the religions and spiritualities of the world concerning their basic stories about the origin of creation and about the great stories that gave meaning to their lives. He found the same images there, like the gods and goddesses, the witches and the devils. He found the same images like bodies of water, like a bridge, the spiritual journey. And he came to the conclusion that all of this had to have come from deep inside themselves. Freud would have disagreed. He would say there had to have been one individual who came up with those ideas and passed it on to others by word of mouth. Jung, however, had this belief that these things are so basic to humanity that they spring from the very depths of our own unconscious. Now, among all the spiritual patterns that he dealt with, there was one in particular that is of importance to us today, and that is the God archetype. He said, unless and until we learn to act as if there is a God, we are never ever going to be happy. Now, people pressed him and said, well, do you believe that there is in fact a God? And he said, my personal belief in this matter is not the issue. As a psychologist, however, I can say that we at least have to act as if there is a God. Now, you and I know that there are millions of people who are walking around the streets out there who simply don't have that belief. They are pathetically looking for happiness everywhere except by having recourse to the higher power inside themselves. And we, in fact, would agree with Carl Jung that a person will never ever be happy unless and until they get in touch with that higher power, the God found within us all.
Thank you, Father. We look forward to hearing from you in the weeks to come.
Don't go away. We'll be right back. A few weeks ago, we at Reel to Reel began an appeal for your financial support. Many of you responded generously, and we wholeheartedly thank you. Because of that, we're able to continue to bring you our show every week. However, we still need and appreciate your continued support. As you know, for the past 5 seasons, we've been able to bring you this weekly show, requesting only your cards and letters in return. If you're a new viewer, or if you've enjoyed the message of Reel to Reel over these past years, we'd like to thank you for watching and invite you to participate in this venture by actively supporting the show. Today, with costs rising all around us, we need your financial support. A donation of $5, $10, $20, or whatever you can send would help ensure the continued presence of this program. Send your contributions to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, PA 19103, and thank you for your help. As we're about to hear from Father Daniel Murray, we can benefit from the past by looking at history. 2,000 years ago, Malachi felt that God's chosen people had learned nothing from their past. Are we like those people about whom Malachi spoke?
It would be an understatement to say that the prophet Malachi was upset and frustrated. What bothered Malachi was the fact that God's chosen people had learned nothing from their history. There was always a tension between God's will and their conduct. Even the priests who should have known better were forgetting their responsibilities. Malachi had to do something. He wanted to wake everyone up. Blazing like an oven, he said, the day of the Lord will come. Every evildoer will be burned up, reduced to stubble. Neither branch nor root will remain of this rebellious people. 2,000 years later, we can still feel the heat of Malachi's words. He was trying to incite his people. It had seemed to him that everyone had fallen under some sort of spell. The original fervor for God's law had become a dying ember. People had become careless and listless in their relationship with God. Immorality was creeping through the cracks, and a whole nation was about to die. Malachi spoke with great intensity against hypocrisy, infidelity, divorce, false worship, and arrogance. We might think that his words have no meaning for us today. That would be a mistake. Recently, Claude Lewis wrote in the Philadelphia Inquirer. He said that we live in terrible times. 1 in 2 marriages fails. Divorce is no longer a scandal. Motherhood in the absence of a husband is becoming increasingly acceptable. Schools pass out contraceptives to teenage girls. Each year, 40 million abortions occur worldwide. Drug addiction is reaching epidemic proportions. Crime and violence are rampant. All this in a so-called Christian nation. While we stand around admiring the beauty of our churches and temples, the world in which we live is falling apart. We become indifferent and insensitive to the evil taking place around us. Malachi says, wake up. Jesus warns us not to lose our critical sense by listening to false prophets, charlatans who try to tell us there's nothing wrong. St. Luke in today's gospel has little time for those who sit passively and watch all this happen. He passes on Jesus' advice. Boldly profess your faith. Bring the gospel's values to every situation you meet. Throughout your witness, have patient endurance, that active hope that gives evidence of inner joy, peace, and strength.
The people in our next segment are not sitting passively by. They're heeding the call of the Gospels by working with the poor and creating housing for people in need. They're Habitat for Humanity, an organization based in Americus, Georgia.
Habitat for Humanity is a housing ministry with an approach committed to getting people involved. It's not a government-funded program, and it's not a giveaway. Habitat is funded by private donations and uses the good neighbor approach to construct homes for the needy. Volunteers from many sources, such as church groups, schools, and businesses, donate their time. They do everything from fundraising to public relations work, from finding properties to actually picking up hammers and doing the dirty work.
This housing program is different because the housing recipients must actually work on their house to be eligible to receive it. They pay a monthly mortgage on their new home, but with no interest charge. This makes decent housing affordable to low-income people and also ensures that Habitat will have the money to continue putting faith in action.
This work is housing. It's providing decent, modest shelter for God's people in need.
It's just growing, expanding to wherever people feel needed, that we could go to them and help them.
As a Catholic, I feel this is a good way to use my time. I know it's a ministry, it's not just a program.
Well, I give my time for Habitat for Humanity because I know my own housing needs. I know how I've been blessed with adequate housing.
I think they are beautiful people, and the main thing is they put the Lord in the front of them, and that part I enjoy because it's built off of Christianity. And there's love.
Building, Christianity, love. 3 components essential to Habitat for Humanity. Habitat is a non-profit ecumenical ministry dedicated to working with the poor to build decent, affordable housing. Now in its 10th year, it addresses 2 key issues: home ownership and sweat equity. Homes are earned through hard work and purchased by a Habitat partner over a 20-year period, with no interest charges by Habitat. It's a formula proven throughout the United States and the world.
Internationally, the poor are much worse off than much of what we see in this country. People literally live in run-down mud huts or worse. So the need exists for Habitat abroad, and we're at work in 17 other countries. We provide the necessary capital for building and construction and a certain amount of expertise. Then, in the Habitat way, we go in and organize and work with people to provide decent, modest housing. And we're also working in 171 cities around the United States, affiliate projects we call these. Locally, we're Habitat for Humanity, Greater Philadelphia Incorporated.
This local affiliate's first project is the rehabilitation of 4 buildings in North Philadelphia on the 1900 block of Wilt Street. Ownership of the first nearly completed home is contingent upon 500 hours of sweat equity work by Mary Butler.
I feel great. I feel that I'm sure the neighborhood's going to look better, and we'll have a better place to live. And I feel like the people will get together and will show their love towards each other more. It's a different attitude. And I'm just glad that the Habitat picked our neighborhood to come to work into.
Mrs. Butler contributes in whatever way she can to fulfill her 500-hour requirement for her and her ailing husband, Eddie. Public relations work, paperwork, and muscle work.
I feel even I put in my 500 hours, I'm still willing to continue to help somebody else because somebody had to help me. And I'm willing to do, continue to do whatever I'm able to do.
Thinking in terms of the ecumenical aspect of this, I think there's a real genius to it because you can set aside almost all of the theological differences that separate people of whatever faith and recognize that a common cause such as building housing for people with genuine needs is a way to work together.
You get just a feeling of joy, the Christian fellowship that goes on working with people from all denominations and fellow Catholics, knowing I'm doing the Lord's will. It's a feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of being part of something on a tangible level.
The philosophy of Habitat for Humanity is to exalt Jesus Christ as Lord through loving acts and spoken word. And Habitat is a very tangible way for us to live out our faith. Christ has commanded us to love one another. What does that mean to you? To me, it means to go out and to lend a hand physically with some of the needs that I see in the community.
I feel the way when they leave this neighborhood, I feel as it's that way all over, that they leave some Christianity and some people maybe that had less faith will have more faith. I'm just proud that they stopped in our neighborhood, and I believe that love will go all over everywhere they travel.
One thing we noticed the day this story was shot was the wide variety of people working on Mrs. Butler's block. Black and white, young and old, skilled and unskilled, Catholic and Protestant. Yet everybody worked on their own special part of the project as if it was their own house they were building.
Habitat can use your help. Your talents, no matter what they might be, can really make a difference. If you'd like to get involved,
or if you have any questions or comments, please write to us here at
Reel to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, Room 907, Philadelphia, PA 19103.
Or call us during business hours at area code 215-668-9842.
Next week, Reel to Reel visits an all-natural chapel. We'll meet a New Jersey woman who fights for the poor. Father Joe Glass looks back on the work of a local architect, and we'll visit a Washington-based outreach center where no one is too old to learn. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to seeing you next week, and we'd like to hear from you soon. Good night.
Good night, and be confident knowing that Jesus is Lord.
Travel arrangements for Reel to Reel by Atkinson and Mullen Travel of Media, PA. Phone area 215-565-7070.
By now you probably have heard of the Catholic Pentecostal Renewal or have met someone involved in the renewal.
Monsignor Walsh has written many books concerning Catholic Charismatic Renewal and has produced a series of tapes, The Spirit and the Church. Just go to your local bookstore and ask to see them, or call 215-668-HOPE for a free brochure.